It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I was still wiping the grit off my hands when the phone buzzed in my back pocket. The scent of motor oil and copper lingered on my gloves, the warmth from the HVAC unit I'd just fixed still radiating behind me. I peeled off the gloves, stuffed them into my belt, and glanced at the screen. Mom. I smiled instinctively, even before answering. Thanksgiving was always my favorite, Mom's stuffing, the way the house smelled of sage and cinnamon, and that familiar chaos of my cousins shouting over football. I had even rearranged my work schedule so I could be there on time this year, not dragging in late like usual. Hey, Ma, I answered, stepping into the alley behind Sky Heat Systems to get some quiet. You need me to bring anything tomorrow? Pie? Wine? I've got time to pick something up. Actually, she interrupted, and my stomach dropped. Her voice had that tone. The careful, diplomatic one she used when she was about to say something that wasn't going to sit right. Riley, honey, I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving. Okay, I braced myself, leaning against the brick wall. Well, it's going to be a little smaller this year. Colton's hosting at his apartment, and he and Lana have invited her family. It's a formal kind of thing, you know? Just close family. Just close family, I repeated, the words landing heavy in my throat. Yes, and since he's already tight on space, I thought it might be best if we kept it simple. Just parents and, the new in-laws getting to know each other. I closed my eyes. My pulse pounded in my ears. But I'm close family. Of course you are, sweetheart. You know that. This is just different. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. The silence dragged long enough that she added, "We'll have something at Christmas, Riley. Just us. I'll make your favorites." Okay. I swallowed hard and nodded, though she couldn't see it. Sure, I said flatly. Okay. Thanks for understanding, she replied quickly, like she was relieved I didn't push back. Love you. Yeah. You too. I hung up without saying goodbye. The alley felt colder than it had a minute ago, the draft slicing right through my work jacket. I stared at the brick wall across from me, at the faded graffiti someone had sprayed years ago, and tried to keep the sting out of my eyes. Colton. My little brother. The same kid I used to carry on my back when he fell asleep on the couch. The one I used to make grilled cheese for when Mom worked doubles. And now he couldn't even make space at a dinner table? I shoved my phone back in my pocket, furious with myself for letting it hit so hard. I'd survived worse. I'd worked 2 jobs straight out of high school to keep the lights on at home. I hadn't expected gratitude, but I hadn't expected exile either. It wasn't until later that evening, when I was wiping down counters at the shop and locking up for the holiday weekend, that my phone buzzed again. A message from Nora, my cousin. Nora, Riley. I'm so sorry. Just found out you're not coming. Colton said you wouldn't fit the vibe. Said he didn't want his girlfriend's family asking why his sister works in maintenance. I stared at the screen, rereading the words until they blurred. My throat tightened, the old ache that came when someone you loved didn't love you back the way you thought. Maintenance. Like I was a dirty secret. I typed back slowly. Me. Thanks for telling me. It's good to know the truth. She replied almost instantly. Nora, he's a jerk. You don't deserve that. Everyone knows how hard you've worked. I put the phone face down on the table, hands trembling. The truth settled in like ice in my chest. This wasn't about space. It wasn't about formal dinners or introductions. It was about shame. My brother was ashamed of me. Not who I was as a person, but what I did for a living. The work that kept his heat on, his tuition paid, his car running. The work I was proud of. The memory of late nights crawling under houses to fix broken ductwork came rushing back. The times I'd picked up emergency calls on holidays just to make enough to send Colton extra for his books. I had given without hesitation. And now he'd given me the clearest response yet. I was no longer welcome if I didn't fit into his shiny new life. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there for a while, the hum of the vending machine the only sound in the shop. I let the stillness wrap around me, gave myself a few long minutes to process the hit. Then I grabbed my thermos, turned off the lights, and locked the door. If this was the year I was excluded for being just HVAC, then fine. Let them have their starched napkins and polished wine glasses. I had my own table to sit at, even if I was the only one at it. And something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, started to flicker. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Resolve. Let them pretend I didn't exist. I knew what I was worth. And this year, I was finally going to stop waiting to be seen. I didn't sleep much that night. The hours blurred together, my mind racing with memories I'd long stuffed into corners I didn't visit often. I thought about Colton's smile, the perfect, polished one he'd used to charm professors, girlfriends, internship recruiters. It was the same one he used when he'd ask me for help, like he wasn't asking at all, just letting me be the hero again. That smile had cost me years of my life. I rolled out of bed around 5. The shop didn't open for another couple of hours, but I needed to move, to do something, anything, that reminded me I still had control over my own damn life. I brewed coffee, black and strong, the way Gus liked it at the shop, and stared out the window of my apartment. The city was still sleeping, lights dim in most of the windows. My toolbox was leaning by the door, clean and organized the way I'd left it. At least that was something I could count on. The silence gave way to thoughts I tried to push back down, but they clawed their way up anyway. All the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All the times Colton had called, not to ask how I was, but to ask for something: money for textbooks, cash for rent, help with a busted laptop before finals. And every time I said, "Don't worry, I got you." I really thought I was doing the right thing. He was the smart one, the one who made it to college. Our parents had always told him he had a bright future, like the rest of us were just here to clap from the sidelines. And I didn't mind it at first. I'd figured he'd graduate, pass the bar, and maybe, just maybe, he'd remember how he got there. But Colton had a talent for rewriting history, especially when it suited him. By the time he was halfway through law school, you'd think he'd done it all on his own. He spoke in sound bites now. Self-made, worked my way up, earned everything I've got. He said those things in front of people who didn't know better, and I let him. I didn't want to embarrass him. Or maybe I didn't want to admit to myself how easily he'd let go of me. One weekend in particular came flooding back, the time he called me panicked, saying his rent check had bounced and his landlord was threatening eviction. I was on a job 2 hours out, lying on my back under a rusted furnace, sweating through my clothes. But I paused, pulled myself out, and wired him the money before I even finished the job. I didn't tell him I skipped my own rent that month to make it happen. I just told him it was no problem. And he replied, "You're a lifesaver," with that same bright smile I used to fall for every time. And now I was embarrassing. My trade, my uniform, my calloused hands, all of it was apparently too blue-collar for Lana's family. I wondered what kind of story he told them. Maybe I didn't exist at all. Maybe I was just out of town or not close or doing her own thing. He was good at spinning narratives. Always had been. I walked over to my small file cabinet and pulled open the drawer I didn't touch often. Inside was a thick folder labeled Colton. Bank statements, tuition bills, electronic receipts, every dollar I'd paid on his behalf. I hadn't kept it for leverage. I think some part of me just wanted a record, a reminder that I'd mattered in his journey. A footprint. Proof that I was there. I thumbed through it slowly, page by page. Over 5 years, I'd contributed more than $46,000 to his education. Rent. Books. A deposit on his first apartment. Even that fancy suit he wore to his mock trial event? Yeah, that was me too. I'd picked up extra weekend shifts, worked Christmas Day, even canceled 2 vacations I never rebooked. I did it all willingly. And not once did I ask him to pay me back. But now, as I stood in my own kitchen, watching the dawn stretch across the buildings outside, it struck me how little any of it had meant to him. He'd erased me. Smiled through it. I pulled my phone out and opened the group photo from last year's Thanksgiving. Colton standing at the center, Lana tucked under his arm, our mom beaming beside him. I was at the end of the frame, mid-laugh, wearing my work boots because I'd come straight from an emergency call. I'd fixed a heater for an elderly couple that morning, and I remember being so proud of it. No one had thanked me then, either. I set the phone down, poured another cup of coffee, and finally let the anger come. I wasn't angry because I wanted attention. I didn't need applause. I didn't care if Lana's parents thought I was a secretary or a janitor or a chimney sweep. What I cared about was the silence. The quiet betrayal of being written out like I was a line item on a budget Colton no longer needed. He had taken what he wanted from me, my support, my sacrifices, and then cut me out when I no longer fit the story he wanted to tell. That was the truth behind the smile. Not gratitude. Not love. Convenience. A user's grin, polished and practiced, designed to keep the money flowing and the questions at bay. Well, the bank was closed now. I closed the folder and returned it to the drawer, locking it this time. Not because I needed to protect it, but because I was done looking at it. The chapter was closed. And if Colton wanted to keep pretending I didn't exist, I'd make that true in all the ways that mattered. Because this year, I wasn't just out of the Thanksgiving guest list. I was out of the illusion that family always comes first. The sun hadn't even come up yet when I sat down at the kitchen table, still in my robe, hair damp from a quick shower. I didn't bother with coffee this time. My stomach was too knotted to eat or drink anything. I'd barely slept, the weight of years pressing heavy on my chest. I had been a provider, a fixer, a silent financial backbone, and now I was being erased like none of it mattered. But I wasn't going to stew in that anymore. I was going to do something. The cold glow of my laptop screen lit up the room as I logged into the Eastford University billing portal. It had been over a year since I'd last checked the account. Everything was set to autopay, and I'd kept it that way, dutifully funneling hundreds of dollars a month into Colton's future while I quietly passed up on things like health insurance upgrades or new tires. The login still worked. Of course it did. I was still listed as the primary financial contact. The page loaded slowly, and for a moment I hesitated. A whisper in the back of my mind asked if I was sure. But the image of that Thanksgiving table, my mother, my brother, Lana's polished family, and no seat for me, hardened my resolve. The current balance blinked in front of me, $22,047.63, due in 6 weeks. I clicked on the Payment Authorization tab, navigated to the section where I was listed as the payer, and hovered my mouse over the Remove button. I wasn't just removing myself from a billing plan, I was removing myself from a lie I'd been feeding for far too long. A lie that my love and loyalty would always be expected, never respected. I clicked it. The screen refreshed. A little green notification popped up. You have been successfully removed as financial contact for the student. I sat back in my chair and exhaled, a sound that felt more like a release than a breath. It was done. No dramatic speech. No confrontation. Just done. Within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. Miriam, Mom, call me now. Then another. Miriam, just got a notification about Colton's tuition. What's going on? Then, as I was brushing my teeth. Miriam, Riley, did you take yourself off his account? You promised. You promised, Riley. I turned off the phone, set it on the counter, and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My hair was still damp, curling around my face, and my eyes looked tired, but there was something else there. Steady. Focused. The face of someone who had finally drawn a line. By the time I got to the shop, the messages had tripled. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. I scrolled through them with one eye while logging into our client portal at the front desk. Gus walked in behind me, sipping his third Red Bull of the morning. You okay? He asked, peering over his thermos. You look like you just survived a hostage negotiation. I let out a dry laugh. In a way, yeah. I didn't go into details. Gus didn't know much about my family, and I liked it that way. To the crew, I was the boss who showed up, worked hard, and never asked for praise. That was enough for me. But the phone wouldn't stop. Miriam called again at lunch. I stepped outside to take it this time, mostly so I wouldn't have to explain anything to the team if my voice cracked. Riley, she started, her voice sharp with panic, tell me this is a mistake. It's not. You took yourself off Colton's account? He's in the middle of finals. You know how much pressure he's under. He's a grown man, Mom. I said calmly, though my chest was pounding. He'll figure it out. He can't get loans. You know that. You've always known that. That's not my problem anymore. Her silence hit like a slap. What happened? She asked, her voice smaller now. Why are you doing this? You let him cut me out of Thanksgiving because I didn't fit the image he wanted to present to Lana's family. You said it was just close family, like I was some distant cousin. And then I found out he told them I work in maintenance and didn't want me there. He's ashamed of me, Mom. That's not true. It is true. And you didn't defend me. You played along. She inhaled sharply, but I didn't stop. For years, I worked myself raw so he could go to school and not worry about money. I gave up my time, my savings, my peace. And now I'm not even worth a place at the table? You promised, she said again, clinging to the phrase like it was a life raft. I did. And I kept that promise longer than I should have. But I'm not doing it anymore. He wants to be treated like an adult? Let him act like one. Her voice cracked, finally. You know how this will affect him? Maybe he'll finally learn what it's like to stand on his own. She hung up. No goodbye. Just the soft click of disapproval. I stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, my breath visible in the cold. But I didn't feel shaken. I felt free. For so long, I had believed that being the dependable one meant I had to keep giving, even when it hurt. That love meant sacrifice, even when it went unnoticed. But love without respect isn't love at all, it's servitude. And I was done serving people who didn't see me. Inside the shop, I got back to work. We had a ductless install to finish, and a client in Pine Hollow whose heat had gone out. The crew was counting on me, and that kind of responsibility felt honest. Real. Around 4 p.m., one last message came in from Miriam. Please, don't do this to your brother. I didn't reply, because the truth was I hadn't done anything to him. I just finally stopped doing everything for him. By Friday, I had stopped counting how many times my phone buzzed. Colton was relentless. Texts, missed calls, voicemails I refused to listen to. Even an email, because apparently when the emotional appeal doesn't work, the formal route is next. He was spiraling, and for once, I wasn't the net waiting to catch him. I stood at the workbench in the back of the shop, checking over parts inventory for a commercial contract we had lined up next week. The label gun jammed, spitting out a crooked string of barcode stickers. I sighed and fiddled with it, trying not to let the growing tension in my chest win. Then my phone lit up again. Voicemail. I stared at it for a moment, jaw tight, before finally pressing play. His voice crackled through the speaker, tired and frayed. Riley, please, can you just pick up? I don't understand why you're doing this. Mom says you're pissed about Thanksgiving, but it wasn't personal. It was just optics, you know? Lana's family, they have expectations. I was trying to make things go smoothly. It's not like I don't appreciate everything you've done. I thought you'd get it. A pause, then a quieter voice. I can't get the tuition covered. I've called 4 banks. No one's budging. I need you to help me out, just one more time. Please. If not for me, then for Mom. I deleted the message. It wasn't that I didn't care that he was scared. I did. But this wasn't the first time he'd used fear like a crowbar to pry open my generosity. There was always some crisis, some pleas, some angle. I used to think it was desperation. But now I saw it for what it was. Manipulation dressed up in sentimentality. Later that afternoon, Nora dropped by the shop. She worked in an office not far from us and swung by every now and then to pick up lunch or bring me a latte when she had time. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a cinnamon latte and leaned on the counter. I assume you've heard from him, she said. I nodded, sipping the drink. Endlessly. He showed up at Lana's place. That caught my attention. I turned to face her fully. What? Yeah. Apparently, he was losing it. She called me after he left. Said he was pacing and ranting. He told her he couldn't pay tuition and that you just vanished. I scoffed. I didn't vanish. I stepped back. Big difference. Nora raised an eyebrow. Oh, I know. But that's not how he framed it. He said you betrayed him. That you knew how much this semester mattered, and that you were sabotaging him because of some grudge. My stomach turned, not out of guilt, but out of the sheer audacity of it. Sabotage? As if I hadn't carried his entire educational career on my back for half a decade. He told her that his parents were paying for law school, Nora added softly. I blinked. Wait, what? He never told her it was you, she confirmed. She was stunned. Said she felt sick. You should have heard the way she talked, like someone just told her she's been dating a stranger. I leaned against the counter, stunned. He lied to her for 2 years, I murmured. 2 years. She thought my parents were paying for his school. Apparently, he said it was a family contribution. Glossed over the details. Made it sound like your folks were the ones footing the bill and that he was working part-time to help. The quiet fury that simmered inside me began to bubble. Not because I needed credit, but because that lie had cost me peace, time, and opportunity. I had worn myself thin to make sure he didn't drown, and now I was the invisible life vest, conveniently edited out of the story. How did she take it? I asked. Not well. She told him to leave and hasn't responded to him since. Said she needed time to reevaluate. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Bitter, low, and tired. Reevaluate, huh? She finally saw the fine print. Nora looked at me gently. You did the right thing, Riley. I know it hurts, but it was time. Yeah, I said, even though a part of me still flinched at the sound of his voice in that voicemail. I know. After she left, I went about the rest of my day, changing filters, handling quotes, answering customer calls, but Colton stayed with me, like an ache in the ribs. That evening, I sat on my couch, heating pad on my lower back, flipping through old invoices. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Colton, I just need help until December. That's it. If you do this, I promise we're even. Please, Riley. Even. As if there was a version of this where we could ever be even. I had given so much that I didn't even recognize what my life would have looked like if I hadn't. My business could have expanded 2 years ago. I could have taken a proper vacation. Maybe even gone back to school myself. But I had funneled all of it into him like he was the only hope our family had. And what did I get in return? No seat at the table. No acknowledgement. Just blame when I finally said no. I turned off my phone for the night. If he was spiraling, let him spiral. Maybe that was what needed to happen for once. Maybe he needed to feel the fear that came with standing on your own. I stared up at the ceiling in the dark, letting the silence wrap around me. I used to think love meant showing up no matter what. But now I was learning that love, real love, has boundaries. And mine had finally been drawn. Let him chase answers. Let him sit with consequences. Let the truth pour out where it needed to. I was done being the secret hero. I don't know what I expected when I finally stopped answering. Maybe I thought Colton would sulk for a few days, retreat into silence, and find some other way to fund his fantasy. But desperation has a funny way of stripping people down. By Monday, the cracks in his carefully polished world were starting to show. It started with a text from Nora. Nora, he's officially in panic mode. Got denied for 2 private loans. Parents tried to co-sign, no dice. You weren't kidding about their credit being trash. I wasn't. I'd known for years that our parents' financial situation was a rickety mess hidden behind polite smiles and holiday centerpieces. They'd always kept up appearances, Mom with her seasonal wreaths, Dad with his perfectly pressed shirts, but underneath, it was unpaid credit cards, missed mortgage payments, and a long history of overextension. I never held it against them. They were doing the best they could with what they knew. But they weren't in any position to carry Colton through law school, not even if they wanted to. That's why I had stepped in all those years ago. That's why I had worked through my 20s like I was running a race no one else even saw. I had filled the gap. Quietly. Consistently. But not anymore. The next day, I heard from Marisol, one of Lana's friends. She came by the shop for a routine heat pump checkup and lingered after the job was done. You hear what happened with Colton? She asked, her voice low like we were sharing gossip in a high school hallway. I shrugged, wiping my hands on a rag. I've heard bits. He's been calling everyone. Looking for anyone with a decent credit score. said it's an emergency and that he was blindsided by the tuition thing. I arched a brow. Blindsided? Yeah, she said, nodding. Told Lana he thought his tuition was handled for the semester. She didn't buy it. I don't think anyone did. There was something about the way she said it that told me more than the words themselves. Colton's charm had hit its limit. The golden boy act was beginning to lose its shine. Lana's been quiet, she continued. Like, really quiet. It's weird. She used to talk about him constantly. Now she's just sort of observing. I nodded slowly, filing the information away without comment. Anyway, Marisol said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Just thought you'd want to know. Word. Thursday started like any other day at Sky Heat Systems. The coffee pot was half full, Gus was already elbows deep in the guts of a rooftop unit schematic, and the front office smelled faintly like WD-40 and lemon disinfectant. I was going over a customer work order when I saw the time, 8:46 a.m., and made a mental note to call the supplier about that delayed delivery for the Pine Hollow job. Then the front door slammed. It wasn't the casual jingle of a customer or the firm stride of one of the techs. It was angry, chaotic, like someone had burst in without knowing what they'd do once inside. I looked up, and there he was. Colton. My brother. His hair was unkempt, tie loose, face blotchy with rage. He looked nothing like the polished, confident man he used to present to the world. His eyes were wide and wild as they scanned the shop floor until they locked onto me. You, he seethed, marching toward the counter. You really think this is funny? Gus stood up from behind the workbench instantly, hands still dirty with grease. Riley? He asked, tone warning. I gave a small shake of my head. Not yet. Colton slammed both palms on the counter, causing the clipboard in front of me to jump. You cut me off, lied to Lana, and now she's gone. Are you happy? You've ruined everything. I stared at him calmly. I didn't lie to Lana. You did. For 2 years. I just stopped playing along. She thinks I'm a fraud, he spat. She said I used her, used you, used everyone. Then maybe she's finally seeing the truth. His face twisted. You could have just talked to me, Riley. We're family. I leaned forward slightly, voice low but steady. You made it clear I wasn't family when you erased me from your life. Thanksgiving? Remember that? You let Mom tell me I wasn't invited because I didn't fit the vibe. You stood by and let her say I wasn't close enough family to be there. It wasn't personal. It was absolutely personal, I snapped, my tone sharper now. You were ashamed of me. My work. My life. Everything I did to keep you afloat while you played dress-up as Mr. Future Lawyer. I was good enough to bankroll you, but not good enough to sit at your table. By now, the shop had gone quiet. The 2 junior techs near the break room were frozen mid-sandwich. Gus had stepped closer, arms crossed but ready. I could feel everyone listening, the tension thick in the air. Colton's mouth opened, then closed. He was unraveling. I needed you, he said, almost pleading. I just needed a little more time. One more payment. That's all. Why would you pick now to make a statement? Because it was never going to be just one more, I said, my voice calm again. There was always going to be another emergency. Another reason. Another manipulation. That's not fair. Isn't it? I tilted my head. How many times did you thank me, Colton? For the textbooks? The rent? The car repairs? The food deliveries when you were too broke to shop? You acted like it all came from thin air. Like you were owed it. I never asked you to. Yes, you did, I cut in. You asked me every time with that tone, that charm, that practiced little guilt trip. You just didn't say the words. And I was too tired, too busy, or too damn loyal to call you out. His fists clenched at his sides. Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? I stared him down. I gave you your life, Colton. And now I'm taking my hands off it. Silence. The kind that settles like dust after something breaks. He looked around then, eyes darting to the techs, the receptionist, Gus. He realized, maybe for the first time, that this wasn't his space. This wasn't a courtroom where he could control the narrative or charm the audience. This was my shop, my team, my world, and not one person was on his side. Gus stepped forward, finally. Calm, but firm. I think it's time for you to leave, man. Colton blinked. I'm talking to my sister. No, Gus said. You're yelling at our boss. Big difference. The junior tech stepped aside as Gus walked around the counter, putting himself between us. I didn't need protection, but I appreciated it anyway. Colton glanced at me again, eyes brimming with something sharp and dangerous, humiliation. You'll regret this, he muttered. I swear. I've regretted a lot of things, I replied, but this? Standing up for myself? Not one bit. He stormed out then, shoving the door open so hard it ricocheted against the wall before slamming shut behind him. Silence. Then Gus turned to me. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah. Better than I've been in a long time. The two junior techs shuffled out of the break room a second later, whispering to each other, wide-eyed but smart enough not to say anything out loud. I turned to the receptionist, who was still frozen behind the computer. Sorry about that, Jen. Everything's fine. You can go ahead and call the next client. She blinked, nodded, and got back to work. 10 minutes later, it was like it never happened. The machines hummed, the calls came in, and tools clinked in their trays. But something had shifted. For years, I had been afraid of confrontation, afraid that drawing a boundary would mean losing the people I loved. But standing there, watching Colton walk away for the first time without taking something from me, I realized I hadn't lost anything. I had gained my voice. And no one, not even my brother, was going to take that from me again. It didn't take long for the silence to break. The morning after Colton's meltdown in my shop, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, messages, and emails from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, some in years. A parade of familiar names now typed in bold across my screen. Aunt Bev, Cousin Jordan, Uncle Terry. Even Gran, who barely knew how to operate her flip phone, had somehow figured out how to leave a voicemail that started with, Riley Lynn, I'm disappointed in you. Disappointed in me. I didn't even open the texts at first. I just stared at the stream of them, letting them pile up. The names. The assumptions. The recycled phrases. He's your brother. Family sticks together. What kind of person pulls the rug out from under someone trying to better themselves? I just don't understand, Riley. That last one came from Aunt Paula, the same woman who never once asked how I was doing in the years I worked back-to-back shifts and missed birthdays to make sure Colton didn't fall behind. The same one who used to call him our golden boy while looking right through me like I was the staff hired to serve drinks. I closed my messages without replying and tossed the phone onto the counter like it burned. Where were they on Thanksgiving? When I was left off the invite list? When my own mother gave my spot to Lana's family like I was some second-tier relative, not the person who had made Colton's whole life possible. No one said a word then. Not one of them reached out. And now that the money had stopped, the support, the quiet enabling, I was suddenly the villain? It was funny in a bleak, soul-crushing sort of way. I made myself a sandwich I didn't really want and sat at the tiny kitchen table in my apartment, chewing slowly, thinking. Trying to separate the noise from the truth. Trying to remember who I was before I became everyone's fixer. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I ignored it. I had work to do. At the shop, things were mercifully normal. Gus greeted me with a nod, and Jen handed me the keys to the new service van we'd just gotten wrapped. No one brought up Colton, though I was sure the team had heard about the scene he made. I'd watched the security footage twice just to be sure it hadn't gotten too out of hand. It hadn't. Just loud and pathetic. New estimate came through from Overton Street, Gus said, handing me a clipboard. Wants to go ductless for the upstairs units. You want me to handle it? I glanced at the paperwork. You can take the lead. But I'll come by for the walkthrough. Let's make sure they're not underestimating their insulation problems. Copy that. We worked through the afternoon, fixing a busted heat pump and replacing a faulty thermostat in a downtown apartment. I didn't check my phone once. But when I finally did, after dinner, the message that stopped me cold wasn't from a cousin or an aunt. It was from my mother. Miriam, I can't believe you're doing this to your family. You've always been the dependable one, Riley. What happened to you? I stared at the message for a long time, then read it again. What happened to you? Like I'd changed for the worse. Like finding my voice and using it to draw a line was some sort of betrayal. What happened to me? I stopped saying yes when I meant no. That's what happened. I stopped confusing love with self-sacrifice. I stopped bending until I broke. And for the first time in a very long time, I could look in the mirror and not feel like I was disappearing behind other people's needs. I set the phone down and opened my laptop, pulling up Sky Heat's financials. The numbers looked good. Better than good, actually. We'd had our best quarter in 2 years, and bookings were already stacking up for January. I checked the hiring draft I'd started for a second full-time admin. I had the budget. I had the structure. And now I had the space. I spent the rest of the evening working on the job posting, refining the language, updating benefits, adding an option for field tech training that I'd always wanted to offer. My employees were loyal. They deserved more. They deserved what I had given freely to Colton for years without question. As I saved the draft, my phone vibrated once more. Another message. Uncle Terry, what kind of sister are you? I didn't reply. I didn't even open it. Instead, I turned off my phone completely and placed it in a drawer. The kind of sister I was? I was the kind who poured every extra dollar into someone else's dream. The kind who skipped holidays, birthdays, and weekends to keep the lights on at someone else's apartment. The kind who never asked for recognition, just hoped that someday it would matter. And when it didn't, I was the kind who finally said enough. They could say what they wanted. Cast me as the cold one, the heartless one, the selfish sister who wouldn't come to the rescue one last time. But I knew the truth. They only remembered me when I stopped being useful. And I didn't owe them my usefulness. Not anymore. The first post was vague. Just a black and white quote slapped over a moody background. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who cut the deepest. No tags. No context. But I knew exactly who it was about. I stared at it for a second from my work tablet while waiting for a rooftop inspection report to load. I didn't flinch. I didn't scoff. I just shook my head and kept scrolling. 3 posts later, there he was again, Colton, front and center, a selfie with just enough shadows to look distressed but noble. Captioned, doing it alone. The only way I ever learned. I almost laughed out loud. The only way he ever learned? I wanted to take a screenshot of my bank app, the line-by-line records of payments, of monthly withdrawals for his rent, for his books, for every piece of the so-called solo journey he was now romanticizing. But I didn't. I didn't comment. I didn't react. Because that's what he wanted, reaction. By noon, it was clear he'd hit a new phase of the spiral, the social martyr. I didn't have to guess how the rest of the family was reacting. My cousin Jordan had already liked the post, and Aunt Paula commented under it, "Proud of you for rising above, sweetie. Some people don't know how to appreciate what they've got." I read it and calmly deleted the message notification she had sent me 2 days earlier. I just want to understand where your head is at. My head was exactly where it needed to be, focused, forward-facing, and finally free of the emotional chains they'd tried to hang around my neck. I finished the rooftop inspection and drove back to the shop with the windows down, the cold air snapping at my cheeks. It felt good, bracing, clean. The kind of cold that made you feel alive. I stopped for lunch at a food truck parked outside a construction zone, ordered a massive burrito, and sat in the cab of my van with the heat running just enough to keep my hands from freezing. My phone buzzed again. Another post. This one was a photo of Colton as a kid, maybe 5 or 6, grinning with his arm around our dad's neck. The caption read, "Family is everything. Until it isn't." He was spiraling publicly now, crafting the image of a wounded, loyal son abandoned by a cruel sister too focused on money to care about blood. And it was working. The comments flooded in like lemmings over a cliff. You deserve better. Some people only care when the check clears. Real ones don't turn their back on family. Every line dug at a story I wasn't telling. Every sympathetic heart emoji and clapping gif reaffirmed that he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't seeking support. He was waging war. Silently, passive-aggressively, manipulatively. And I didn't care. Not because it didn't sting, it did, in that dull, familiar ache of being misunderstood, misrepresented. But I was too tired to play defense anymore. I'd spent years letting people write the narrative of who I was while I stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Not anymore. I wasn't going to jump into the comments section and defend myself. I wasn't going to post screenshots or old bank statements or initiate a digital custody battle for the truth. Because the people who mattered already knew. And the ones who didn't never really listened anyway. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my boots off, feet propped on the ottoman, a bowl of leftover chili in my lap. I scrolled through social media not as a participant, but as a spectator. More posts. More vague jabs. One of them read, "It's wild how fast people switch up when they don't need you anymore." I almost commented, "You mean when they stop paying for your life?" But I didn't. I took another bite of chili and smiled to myself. Gus would have found it hilarious. Maybe I'd tell him in the morning. Instead of getting sucked into the vortex, I opened the Sky Heat Systems page and checked our ad performance. The job posting I'd published 2 days ago had already drawn a few promising applicants. One resume in particular caught my eye: Carmen Lewis, 5 years of admin experience, bilingual, managed inventory for a crew of 8. I scheduled her for an interview next week. Then I closed the tab and leaned back, letting the silence of my apartment fill the room like a warm blanket. No buzzing. No emergencies. No last-minute "please, Riley" messages to answer. Just space. Just peace. My mind drifted, just for a moment, to the old version of me, the one who might have crumbled under the weight of public perception. Who might have called Colton and begged him to stop posting, to not turn the family against me. Who would have apologized just to smooth the waters, even if it meant drowning myself in the process. That Riley was gone now. And in her place stood someone who didn't need to be liked to be right. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need the family group chat I'd muted weeks ago. I didn't need to defend my name in comments or set the record straight. Let them talk. Let them spin their stories and quotes and photo caption nostalgia. While they whispered in corners and clutched pearls over dinner tables, I was out in the world building something real. Working, leading, growing, living. They could have their versions of events. I had the truth. And I was finally done carrying the weight of being the quiet one who swallowed pain just to keep the peace. Let them talk. I had work to do. It was just after 6 on a cold Tuesday evening when Nora called. I just finished closing the shop, the last invoice signed, and the front lights dimmed, the hum of the heater quieting behind me. The snow hadn't stuck yet, but the air had that sharp, biting edge that told you winter wasn't asking permission anymore. I stood by the work van, key in hand, when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Nora. I hesitated before answering. She was one of the few voices I still welcomed in the chaos, one of the only people who had seen through the performance and stayed solid beside me. "Hey," I answered, locking up the van and glancing down the street, where the orange glow of street lamps reflected off wet pavement. "Hey," she said, voice low, cautious. "You got a minute? For you?" "Always." There was a beat of silence, like she was deciding whether or not to go through with whatever she had to say. And then she sighed. Colton dropped out of Eastford. I didn't react right away. I leaned back against the van, lips parting slightly but no words coming. "He withdrew officially yesterday," she continued. "Apparently he told the school he needed to take a leave of absence due to personal financial hardship." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was shocked, it had been coming for weeks, but because the finality of it, the stark truth of it, settled differently than I'd expected. "He moved back in with your parents," she added quietly. "Of course he did." Dad cleared out the guest room. "Mom's been cooking like he's home from war. It's weird." I let out a slow breath, the chills stinging my lungs. Not weird. Predictable. "I figured you should hear it from me before the rest of the family starts making it a pity parade." "Let me guess," I said, voice dry. "They're already organizing a support fund and writing long Facebook posts about how resilient he is." She gave a sad chuckle. "Not far off." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the street, where a couple walked by bundled in scarves, hands linked, the kind of quiet intimacy that made my throat tighten for reasons I didn't fully understand. "He still blames you," Nora said after a moment. "He's telling everyone that you blindsided him, that he had no idea you were pulling out, that you were angry about Thanksgiving and took it too far." "Of course he is." I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to feel vindicated. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being twisted into someone I wasn't. Tired of defending choices that never should have required justification. "You okay?" she asked. I looked up at the sky, dark and endless. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time in a long while, it was true. After we hung up, I drove home in silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the rhythmic sound of tires over slick pavement and the hum of the heater in the van. My mind replayed the last few months like a slideshow. The phone call from Mom, the truth from Nora, the fallout, the silence. The slow, steady unraveling of something I had spent years building, not a relationship, but a fantasy. The fantasy that if I just gave enough, bent enough, supported enough, I would finally be valued. But now, as Colton sat back in the same house he was so desperate to leave behind, eating Mom's pot roast and spinning his story to anyone who would listen, I felt nothing but relief. Let him go back to where it all started. Let him sit in that familiar comfort and think about the cost of a life built on borrowed support and unearned pride. I arrived at my apartment, set my keys on the counter, and toed off my boots. The warmth hit me as I walked into the living room, my little sanctuary. The soft hum of the space heater, the muted glow of the lamp in the corner, the smell of clean linens and cedar. I curled up on the couch, blanket over my lap, and opened my laptop. Business was steady, actually better than steady. The job ad had pulled in strong candidates, and I had 2 interviews set for the following week. I pulled up the business expansion plan, updated the budget, and realized with quiet satisfaction that I could finally go ahead with the new van lease. I didn't need to ask anyone. Didn't need to factor in surprise withdrawals or emergency sibling support. This was my life now. Entirely mine. Later that night, I got a text from Mom. "Miriam, he's hurting, Riley. You don't know what it's like for him right now." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a reply. "Me, and you don't know what it's been like for me all these years. I'm not responsible for fixing this." I hit send before I could hesitate. No reply came. Just silence. Familiar, but different this time. The guilt used to come next, the tightening in my stomach, the second-guessing, the pull to reach out and smooth things over. But that night, it never came. I set the phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and let the quiet wrap around me. Not like a punishment, but like peace. Colton had collapsed under the weight of the story he created. And for once, I wasn't underneath it with him. I had walked away. Not from family. Not from responsibility. But from the lie that my worth was measured in what I gave away. Let them rewrite the ending however they wanted. I knew the truth. And I was finally living it. The shop was quieter than usual the week before Christmas. Jobs were still rolling in, people always panicked when their heating failed during a cold snap, but there was a softness in the air, the kind that settled over the city when the holiday approached and everyone slowed down just a little. My crew was in good spirits, wrapping up calls early to spend time with family, sneaking cinnamon cookies into the break room, humming Christmas music under their breath. Even Gus, who pretended to be a Grinch every year, had put up a tiny tree on his workstation and strung a red bow around the thermostat display. I moved through it all with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Not the brittle stillness I used to call holding it together, but something solid, grounded peace. The biggest surprise was how natural it felt. After months of emotional whiplash, fighting back guilt, dealing with Colton spiraling, watching relatives shift from silence to venom the moment the money stopped, I was finally walking through my life without apology. And the shop? It was thriving. I sat in my office with the door slightly ajar, reviewing the final numbers for the quarter. We'd exceeded projections by nearly 14%. The new van was already proving its worth, and Carmen, our new hire, had taken to the front desk like she'd been born there. She was sharp, organized, and warm in a way that made clients feel instantly taken care of. I caught her humming along to a holiday playlist as she answered phones, her pen tapping in rhythm on the desk. A year ago, I wouldn't have been able to afford her. Now? I couldn't imagine the place without her. I glanced at the clock. Just past 5. The crew was filtering out, exchanging goodbyes, promises to text over the break. I stepped out of the office to say goodnight to Gus, who was the last to leave, as always. "You good?" he asked, pausing at the door. "Need anything before I head out?" "I'm good," I said. "Seriously. Thanks for everything this year." He gave me a look, part surprise, part something softer. "Right back at you, boss. You built something solid here." As the door shut behind him, I stood alone in the soft light of the shop, the quiet hum of the HVAC system surrounding me. For the first time in years, there were no alarms in the back of my mind. No financial fires to put out. No late-night calls from Colton. No passive-aggressive texts from Mom. Just me. And it was enough. I locked up and drove home under a sky scattered with snow clouds. The roads were quiet, the houses I passed aglow with twinkling lights and inflatable reindeer. Somewhere deep in my chest, the ache I'd been nursing since Thanksgiving began to fade. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough that I could breathe without it tightening around my ribs. At home, I slipped off my boots and jacket, turned on the little tree in the corner, simple, pre-lit, and undecorated except for a small copper star I'd bought at a flea market years ago. It cast a warm golden glow across the room. I poured a glass of wine, reheated some leftover roasted potatoes, and settled onto the couch with my laptop. I had one last thing to check before the holiday break. The message was waiting for me in my inbox. From Miriam Donovan. Subject: Let's talk. Body: We miss you. It's not the same without you. Can we have a real conversation? I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was tempted. Not anymore. But because I wanted to really see it, to understand how many times that exact line had been used as a lure, a hook cloaked in sentiment. The subtext was always the same: return to your role. Resume the pattern. Be the dependable one again. But I wasn't that version of Riley anymore. I didn't delete it immediately. I let it sit there. Read it again. Noted the absence of a true apology. The lack of responsibility. The quiet presumption that my presence was expected, deserved. Then I hovered my cursor over the trash icon. And clicked. Gone. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the silence settle around me. They didn't get it. Maybe they never would. But that was no longer my burden to carry. I had spent too many years bending myself into shapes that made everyone else more comfortable, smiling through being sidelined, calling it love when it was actually convenience. Not anymore. I looked around my apartment. It was small but warm, full of little pieces of myself, blueprints, notebooks, worn flannel blankets, and the faint scent of pine from a candle flickering on the windowsill. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. Built with the same calloused hands my brother had once been embarrassed by. Those hands had built a business. A life. A quiet kind of joy. And they weren't building anyone else's dreams anymore. I picked up my phone, not to check messages, not to scroll, but to text Nora. Me. Thanks for having my back through all of this. Let's grab lunch next week. My treat. She responded almost immediately. Nora, only if we can toast to you finally choosing you. I smiled, the first real, deep smile I'd let stretch across my face in days. Because she was right. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about shutting people out. It was about choosing me. For the first time, the scales had tipped in my favor, not because someone handed me a gift, but because I'd stopped giving mine away without a second thought. No more silent sacrifices. No more conditional love. Just peace. Just pride. Just me. And that was more than enough.